First of all, thank you guys for coming to this breakout. Maybe you heard, we did a last second change, so we're not talking about creating, communicating, and keeping vision. Although I have notes on that. I have notes on that. We prepped that, but in the pre-conference yesterday, some questions came up about how we've navigated some of the issues of women in ministry inside of Salt Company Ames, which is where we lead. And so we decided, hey, let's change and let's do that. And so, Kendra, why don't you share a little bit about what you're doing in Ames, and then I'll kind of jump into.
Yeah, so my name's Kendra Gustafon. I work for Salt Company in Ames, and I'm an associate director. So my role is varied. There's a lot of things that I do, but it's not very clean. But I would say I play a big part alongside of Saul in like hiring, developing, and sending staff, leading our staff in Ames, leading like the structures and systems. I'm like a systems-minded, like administrative, like gifted leader. And so like helping, Saul has great ideas and I make those ideas happen and land. So I love getting to do that, like getting great ideas to actually hit and experience, like people to get to experience them. And so, yeah. I've been on staff for 10 years, so one of the things about our networking and our staff in particular is there's a lot of change and there's a lot of sending. And one of like my roles that I've played has been like a stabilizing presence and like a sending role. And so it's been an honor and a huge difficulty, and challenge to be a sending place or person or whatever, but it's really fun.
Yeah, so I've been in Ames for 4 years. I've been doing college ministry for about a decade and been in Ames for 4 years leading alongside of Kendra. Kendra basically taught me how to do Salt Company because she had been there several years before I even got there. And yeah, I don't know if you guys have ever heard, there's a book called Rocket Fuel that talks about like a powerful leadership dynamic where you have a visionary and an operator together. The visionary with, the creativity, ideas, momentum, that sort of thing. And the operator, kind of getting things done, but not, and that's like a super simplistic way of saying how we partner together, because it's not that I have zero operator in me or that Kendra has no visionary. One of Kendra's gifts isn't just to execute the ideas that I have, but also to say no to a lot of bad ideas I have, which is a lot, probably 9 out of 10. But so like I help with operations and she helps with vision, but that's kind of how our partnership works. So today we wanted to talk about this, like I said, because it came up yesterday, but also I think gender, sexuality, and race, and there's actually a sexuality and race break during the lunch hour. I just feel like those are going to be I would maybe say like the top 3 like apologetic issues over the next 10 to 20 years, inside the church and outside the church. What do you say about men and women? What it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, sexuality, what is God's will for sexuality, and race, obviously, how do we navigate some of the issues as a church? And so with those in mind, we're not going to cover all those. We're just going to kind of focus in on one, like what does it look like to be a woman in ministry? And we'll be speaking both to the women here and to the men, because it's what happens in these kind of things when we say, hey, we're going to do something on women in ministry, more women than men come, and that's fine. But also this is a thing that men need to be thinking about, because a lot of times in churches, it is the men who hold some of the power, or a lot of the power, to apply some of the things we're talking about. And so we're gonna have some fun with it. I wanted to start with a little Bible trivia. Anybody love Bible trivia like me? Nobody. Great. Well, let's start it up. I want you guys to share with me women in ministry in the Bible. And we'll just use the broadest definition of ministry. I'll kind of let everything go here. But women in ministry in the Bible, who can you think of?
Deborah.
Nice. What did she do?
The judge.
Yeah. Yes. What else? Anybody?
Lydia. Priscilla and Acts.
Okay. I heard a couple there. Yeah. Priscilla, what did she do?
She hosted people in her home, I believe.
Yeah, Lydia does too. Priscilla also, she's the one who pulls Apollos aside and shows him the way of truth more accurately. Yeah. So we also mentioned Lydia. whose house was kind of the gateway of the church moving from the east to the west. What else we got? Phoebe, where is she mentioned? Yeah. She might be in Acts 2, but I know at the end of Romans, I think she's the first one that Paul greets, and it appears that she also delivered the letter. Who else we got? Miriam, yeah, worship leader, Moses' sister. Dorcas. Oh, nice one. I don't even know that one. That's not on my list. You got me. What does she do? She's mentioned in one of the epistles, I think. Yeah.
What about Mary? Jesus appeared to her first. So she's kind of the first to share the gospel with the disciples.
Mm-hmm.
Woman at the well.
Yes. Yeah, the evangelist, the Samaritan woman. What else? There's a few obscure ones. I have the list in front of me, so I'm kind of cheating. But there's Huldah, the prophetess in I think it's 2 Chronicles, I can check. 2 Kings, who proclaims the word of the Lord to the leaders of Israel. You've got other examples of not like names of women, but like ministries of women. I mean, you've got Philip's 4 daughters who are all prophets. You got, in Titus, there's women teaching. What did you say?
Esther.
Yeah, Esther. Yeah, serious ministry there. How about save the entire Hebrew people?
Save the world.
Big job.
Ruth.
Yeah. Ruth. There's one that's, it's a little debated, that Junia, who was listed among the apostles in Romans 16. We won't get into that, but probably some sort of leadership there. So lots of names we could mention, and also lots of ministries that women are encouraged to do. And so I think when we have a conversation about women in ministry, depending on what circles you run in, sometimes we start with prohibitions. We start, well, here's what a woman shouldn't do or can't do. And it's like, what? I like to start with the litany of things that women should and can do, and examples of how they have done that in the Bible. And we could also do another list over here, and in history, that what women have done. And so at our church, in our ministry, we have tried to, I think, to elevate women in a way that is helpful and biblical. And so we just want to talk a little bit about that today. And so there's different places we could start, but Kendra, where do you think we should start?
Yeah, I think just one thing to add is one of the primary illustrations of the church of God is family. And healthy families have leadership that's male and female. Healthy families have partnership between male and female. There's brothers and sisters. There's father and mother. And I think that's been a driving, the metaphor has driven a lot of our questions that we've been asking the last 5-10 years about why do men only do these things just because, a lot of times the answer has been because they've always done it, or we just have never thought about why not, or pursued a woman to lead in this particular way inside of our church that is beneficial for the building up of our church. And one thing we've observed is in a mixed gender, multi-generational church, it's really, really healthy for the church to be led by people who represent multi-generational and men and women inside the church. And so it takes a lot of work inside of a complementarian church to figure out how to apply those, how to apply that in a way that's faithful, but it is so worth the work. And we are definitely not at the end of the journey of figuring out we're inside of the middle of wait, how do we know what we believe and have deep convictions that are rooted in the Bible, not in what's normal and cool and popular in our culture, but then how do we do the work of living that out inside of our church in a way that's faithful and helps our church? It helps the health of our church, because women and men are both flourishing and they're actually complementing each other in their leadership.
Yes. So in just a second, I want to talk with you specifically about some of the challenges you have faced and are facing and have overcome. being a woman inside of ministry. I also want to do something just really quickly, because you mentioned a word, complementarian. There's different ways to do this. I'm just going to give we're not going to get into the theology of it today too much. I just want to share a couple of things, kind of a spectrum of things that I have found helpful to just see it. And maybe you're not familiar with these terms, but I'll try to briefly share it. So I won't spell it all out. Complementarian, and then all the way over here I'd put chauvinism. Okay, so I would say in terms of like a faithful Christian position, you've got like here. Now, depending on how you define feminism, I know there's different ways, but if we define feminism in a way that leaves God out of it and actually does not treat men and women as equal, that's problematic now. That's like actually an insult to the image of God. So there's things about traditional feminist philosophy that I'd be like, that actually, I can't even call that like Christian. Same with chauvinism, where there's like equal and opposite errors that also damages what we believe about the image of God. And we're not going to get into all this stuff. But my guess, most like Baptist, we're at a Baptist thing, okay? So most Baptist churches are probably going to be inside of here. And there's a spectrum inside of even that. You know, there's what someone call like hard or soft complementarian or broad or narrow. And so inside of this, which I'm assuming most people are, actually I would even say, unfortunately, the traditional Baptist lanes are often sometimes even a little too broad, okay? So we're saying, okay, there's some really good and right things in here. What I'm asking you to do, I'll just start with some application. And this is both for the men and women in the room. You need to know where your church is at. For a lot of churches, depending on the governing structures, it might be a denominational decision. It might be an elder decision. But you need to know pretty clearly where you're at so you don't go past it, but you also don't go before it. Like you're not wildly doing less than what is allowed and approved for women in your church. And so I think as like a step one, especially for the men in the room, but also for women, like it's a really great thing to know where your church is at so that you can honor where the church is at, understand it, and then kind of live and work and minister inside of that lane. I think that would be a primary takeaway of today is if all of us could go back and get clear with our elders or deacons or whoever it is about like what do we believe about women in ministry? What kinds of ministries are approved and affirmed and encouraged, and what kind of ministries are we saying actually, according to the Bible, we would say that's actually a male-only position or role. So that's like a part one thing. Just know there's a spectrum of things. Most of us probably live somewhere inside of here. It's good to know, like, are you here? Are you here? Are you here? Figure that out and then live inside of that.
Yeah, one of the observations, or just in like talking with people, is there's a lot of assumptions that people make, like just based on what you can see. So like if a woman is not doing this type of role, the automatic assumption is like, well, there's probably reasons for that, and someone has decided that that's not allowable. And it's better and more wise and healthy to like ask and like know and figure out than it is just to like make assumptions based on like what we can see. And so
and it used to be more okay to be like, I'm not sure if that's like a men's or women's role, so I'll just have a guy do it. That used to be okay. That's not okay. To just default to like a boys club, like that's not a good default. A better default is like, I'm going to figure out exactly what is open to both, and then I'm going to have the best person do it, rather than just like, well, I'll just have my guy over here do it because, he's around, I know him, and I don't want to, get in trouble for anything. So figuring out where your church is at is super important. I'm a huge fan of honoring where your local church is at and honoring those elders, and they might be in a variety of spaces. So really helpful to figure out where they are. So tell us some of the challenges you've had. Now, 10 years in ministry, what are some of the challenges you've had to living out being a women in ministry? Because not every conference you've come to has this percentage of men and women. So just talk with us a little bit about some of that.
I think I have felt, especially early on, like a pressure to like be a certain type of woman or a certain type of leader and to fit inside of a certain type of role in the church, just based on like historically the positions that women have played that are great positions or great needs in the church. And so most like specifically for me is to become like thinking or assuming or feeling pressure that like my trajectory, I'm in college ministry right now, but like surely my trajectory is towards women's ministry, in particular, like teaching Bible studies, like leading and discipling women and moms and like just like women only women's ministry, heavy on teaching. And teaching isn't my gift. And like I don't have examples of women who are doing that I'm like, I want to become them, or I aspire to do that. And one of the blessings that I feel is that's all pressure I put on myself. Like the people around me have done such a good job and have really helped me navigate that is not my trajectory, because that's not who God actually like made me to be. And so just because I'm a girl doesn't mean I need to do like women's ministry or kids ministry. If, whatever. So yeah, I think there can be an assumption that like all women are good at certain things that isn't necessarily true and can be really helpful or unhelpful to them and to your church.
And so honesty hour, I've messed this up before. I'm learning. So when I first got into ministry, a few years in, I hired, my first full-time hire was a woman. She's actually here at the conference. Her name is Hannah Beth. If you've met her, you know who I'm talking about. I hired her to be my assistant, which was the absolute worst job for her because she is not an assistant. I think, but in our minds, we have this default, if you're a woman in ministry, you're either doing women's ministry, kids ministry, or like secretary stuff. And it's like, maybe. And if you're good at those things, God bless you. Like, those are all really important positions, okay? I'm not trying to demean those. But that's not what Kendra is. Kendra is functionally an executive director of operations for a mega church, which is, our college ministry is pretty large. So like, that's what she does. She's not a secretary. She's not kids ministry. She does lead women, but she's not like in women's ministry. And so I've made mistakes on this, just assuming, my first hire, it's a woman, which was a good call, but she can be my like assistant / secretary. She's literally, that's like the worst possible job she could have ever done. She did not help me. She created more work for me to do. You can talk to her about it later. So it's good to know. And I don't want to act like I've done this all perfectly. So I just want to share some of my mistakes along the way here. What are some of the other challenges you've faced?
For me, I felt like a guinea pig in a lot of ways, because when I was hired, it was 1 year after that, like the next woman who was higher than me left. And I think I like rode the wave in our church's history of like trying to figure out like what to do with women and what to do with me, and because of that, there wasn't organizationally a woman who was like a step above me to lead me. And so Mark Vance is our current lead pastor, but he was the Salt Community director at the time. What he said was like, I was doing all this work to lead the guys who were on my team, and realized like there was a lot of like neglect in me, even though my contribution and my leadership was high. Just organizationally, we didn't have ways of thinking about how a guy would lead a girl, because we just had never done that. And like, of course there would be challenges, and so boundaries and like all this stuff. And so we just had put in the work of figuring it out. And so that was like a huge risk that he took, and like was like learning how to lead me and disciple me and into professionally in my job, growing and becoming more skilled and having new opportunities and that. And so I think providing professional development and support for females ends up being a challenge because in a lot of contexts there aren't clear like women to do that, and so the default sometimes can be to like not provide professional development and instead just provide like emotional support or care. But for me, like I'm doing a job, and of course I want to be cared for as a Christian, but I want to be helped to do my job better. And so I don't want to just meet with the pastor's wife for care. I want to meet with my boss for like who sees what I do and like help me get better at what I do. So that's one of the things that I've seen like of just like frustration or just practical challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's an interesting, I don't know if we're going to hit that later, but just that, how do you like develop somebody as a leader in a work versus like disciple them? And it's there. We want to say there are some boundaries, you know. There's helpful boundaries to have when it's a cross-gender discipling and developing relationship. But what often happens is like, which I've also done. Okay, another mistake for me. Okay, I'm like, oh, like there's women on our team. I'll just have my wife do it. Now, if your wife is particularly gifted at discipling or developing, then maybe that can work. That she's like maybe part-time staff or maybe just not on staff, but leading like a staff would. But to have that as an assumption that, oh, the pastor's wife is going to do all things for all the women on staff, I think that's a miss because something's going on there. Sorry. Is there a pastor's wife here? Sorry. Great. Okay. Nice. I'm sure you're great at it. So I'm not talking to you.
No. I'm saying say it again for the people in the back.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. Like I've seen it work where like actually the pastor's wife is particularly gifted in discipling or in developing leaders. But we just want to have the right people, developing the right people inside of their wheelhouse gifting. And so may or may not be the pastor's wife. I'm just saying don't let that be the default. Make it be something that you think through. Let's get the best person to do that for that person.
Yeah, and one more challenge that I'll say is in a lot of people's desire in like genuine like I want to help empower women to like lead. There can be like a aspirational, I'm going to give her a title or I'm going to give her responsibility that surely like that's who I want her to become or what I want in the future to happen, that doesn't set the female up to like actually become something. And so titling is for us one of the places where this happens in our network is like, I want her one day to become like work alongside of a director. So I'll make her an associate director and then she will rise to that. And some of the pressures of our structures in our churches could actually limit and hurt if they're not actual, but they're aspirational. And so one of the worst things for helping women flourish in ministry is bad examples of women not flourishing. And when you put a woman on a stage that's not ready for that stage, maybe she's ready for this stage, but she's not ready for that stage, she provides an example for everyone of like, yeah, that's why we don't, or she wasn't ready for that. And that hurts things. And so I think like help, just like we just have to be careful with our actual employees or actual leaders to put them in positions that they can do and that like incrementally help them grow and to flourish. And I think women need help in that. I have definitely needed help in that process.
Yeah. There's also an equal and opposite error of that. So there's like the title without authority and ability. There's also authority and ability without title, where it's like she's the forever secretary, but literally she's the executive pastor of the church. That happens. She is making like the highest level decisions. Like call her what she is, you know? I mean, inside of what your language your church uses, okay? But call her the executive director if she is truly, executing and directing the operations for the church. Call her that. Don't just always have her as some like women's ministry when actually she's leading men and setting pay scales for men inside of the church. She's not just doing women's ministry anymore. So I think matching the title with the actual job description of what she actually does is really helpful and sets everybody up for success. Okay, where do you want to go next on this? More the personal challenges like that you have specifically faced? Great.
Sure.
Jump in.
And then we're going to be done at least by noon. That's like the max. But we're going to talk just a little bit longer and then would love any questions that you guys have. And so feel free to...
We could also stop right now if you guys have any questions.
Yeah.
We have material to get through, but yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I serve as a lead pastor at a church. My wife's incredible. My laughing was not by any means that she is
Incompetent.
but she was de facto kids minister as soon as we hit the ground, right? And it's like she doesn't. We have 2 kids. She ministers to kids enough. And so, but now my other staffer is a female, and I've had some of those relationships before, and there's things we work hard to protect, so she's got a close relationship with my wife, but I feel like in the Baptist world I grew up in, you have the Billy Graham rule of, okay, I can never be alone with a female in any context because probably what's going to happen is terrible things, and Satan's going to walk in the room, and everything's going to unfold. And so I feel like, what does that look like for you guys to have a really close working relationship where y'all probably spend a lot of time together and make a lot of decisions together? How do you protect like marriage relationship? What's your relationship with Saul's wife? Things like that. What do some of those practicalities look like for you?
Yeah.
That's a great question. Yeah, we have what Pete Scazzaro would call a dual relationship. You know what that is? It's like we're multiple things to each other. Like we're close friends in life, but then we're like ministry partners. Like we're on the same staff team. I can share a few things, and you can just kind of jump in. My wife has a great relationship with Kendra, so that helps. That we're in connection group together. If my wife didn't like Kendra, it would probably affect the working relationship. Just being honest, but we've worked hard to make that a good relationship. The Billy Graham rule is interesting because do you guys know what the Billy Graham rule is? Never be alone. Okay, here's my thought on that. Good intention and R.I.P. Billy Graham. The greatest. But that was one bullet point of multiple things of the Modesto Manifesto, I think is what it was called. There were multiple things that his team committed to, and that's the one that lives on in infamy or fummy in certain groups. And I think there's a lot that's right about it. I won't go on my full hobby horse on it, but I will say it more often than not disadvantages the female in that, not the guy. Because then the guy, what happens is, you're jumping in the car to go grab lunch or something, and you can't take the girl, so you just end up taking the guy. And then so that guy is getting all that kind of informal, like some of the stuff that Drew was talking about this morning, kind of all that informal discipling and development. Now just the guy's getting that because the girl can't come, or she's sitting in the back seat, but the guys are up front talking. So I feel like it can lead to that. So I'm not saying that people shouldn't do the Billy Graham rule. I don't hold to it black and white. But I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm saying if that's a rule that has been placed on you, or if you've placed on yourself in your church context, just make sure that you don't immediately always just have the guy getting all the best, most informal kind of discipleship and development. Make sure that there are ways to include the woman in that as well.
Yeah, which will take more work, but you have to do it if the women are going to have a seat at the table. I think one thing about our culture that has to work together with how we work is authenticity is one of our highest values as a culture in terms of personal integrity and relationship with Jesus and what we do with our sin and repentance and all that stuff. And so Saul can speak for himself, but there's people in my life who I make decisions to tell the uncomfortable things or am honest with in my working relationships with girls and guys. And that has not just like happened overnight, but I was 23 on staff and in male-female relationships and like learned things that then when I was 24 I learned, and then when I was 25 I learned, like and I don't feel like I necessarily have figured it out, but like authenticity being a very high value, people know things about me that I feel comfortable that there's like great checks and balances inside of my relationships. But that's taken a lot of ownership, or I've had to take a lot of ownership in that. But I think that it's hard to say this about yourself, but I hope that like people trust me, and the same, like I hope people trust Saul because of what they know privately about us. Yeah, there's a lot of people in our lives. So yeah, it's like, don't be naive, of course. And it's like, it's really sobering and humbling and scary, to be honest. Like the amount of failure that happens inside of church context, moral failure and sexual sin and in hiding. And it is like so humbling because you never expect the people who fall to fall, and which is a massive megaphone of like, don't ever assume that it's not going to be you. And which means that repentance and authenticity is a present tense choice that we make, not a value we put on the wall. It's like a daily, weekly like rhythm, not one of our, church values. And yeah, male-female relationships is like one of, the easiest places for that to happen. So I don't know.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. Lots more to be said on that. I think for the women in the room, and this will be true kind of all the stuff we say, I would encourage you to like, if you feel like you need, sometimes it's hard to say like, I'm getting left out. Like it's hard to say that because you don't want to then get further left out because now you're complaining. It's like, it's like, it can be a catch-22. And so I can just say like, as a pastor, what I would want to know is like, hey, like I need you to fight for me. Like that's something that I think would be totally fair to like tell your boss, pastor, whoever it might be. I need you to fight for me. I feel like I want to get developed in these ways. I feel like because of certain things in our church, like this is lacking. Like, and sometimes there aren't leading women inside of the local congregation. So maybe it's like, can you help me find an outside coach, a leadership coach who can help me, like a female who's further along if we don't have it here. And so for the guys in the room, like, yeah, you might need to invest in that. Because you're like, well, yeah, I don't have the skills or time or whatever it might be. Or even because of certain policies of church, like I can't do that for you, but like I'm going to find that for you. I'm going to find and pay money so that you can have the development you deserve. And so for both the men and the women here, I think it's right to speak up for yourself. It's totally right. And to say, I need you to fight for me here. I need you to help me here. And kind of meet each other halfway. I wouldn't want the women here to go back and just start assuming like, okay, my pastor better do what that guy did, And it's like, no, you have to take the courage to say some stuff. Like, I feel like I'm maybe getting overlooked and I don't want to be complaining about it, but I do want you to fight for me. I want some more opportunities. So I just want to, breathe a little courage into the women here if you feel like maybe you don't have that. Yeah.
To kind of go off that, I was just curious, how do you guys like communicate with each other? Mm-hmm. Say you see something like in his life, or somebody comes to you with concerns or something that was said. Like, how do you challenge him, his character, or you with her? Like, you see something, and even communicate the concerns of women to him as pastor and leader in a way that's helpful, but also not just making him think that it's like emotional on the side of women. Like, oh, they're just being emotional. They need to get over it. Like, are your concerns valid? So it's kind of two questions.
Totally. I think there's just a ton of trust that's been built. So personally, I don't feel like I represent the women, and my job is to like fight for the women against the men in our context. Like, so that kind of sets the foundation of when I see concerns, it's not that it's never about the women, but it's like, it's about our team or our ministry or that. So I think like oftentimes in those scenarios, it can be an indicator that like there might be more under the surface about that would separate the men and the women, or that like the women need to like fight for something collectively against men or something. Yeah, we try not to separate male and female on our team as much as possible. The only place we do is inside of our staff discipleship. So I lead the girls in like weekly repentance, authenticity, confession of sin type of relationships, and it's all the same for the boys. But inside of all of our other contexts, they're not. But yeah, maybe you have something specific, question.
That's a good question. To be honest, we haven't had a lot of conflict. We have a pretty, I'll just speak for us. I feel like we have a pretty good, like we have a pretty high level of like symmetry and like kind of seeing things the same way. So a lot of times I'll see things in myself probably at the same time she's seeing it. It's like, hey, I did this or said this, I'm going to fix that. Yeah, so I think, and that's part of just we've both been in ministry for a decade, and so you still have like ministry sins. Okay, I'm not saying I don't, but I think we've worked out some of the big, explosive, obvious ones, and so that's one thing. Yeah, we haven't had a lot of conflict and had to work that out.
But I'd say like that's not always been true. In my past relationship, there was a lot of like tension that I felt of like. Seeing things maybe for the first time, or like, why this, why not that? Like, why is she paid that? And she does that and not that, like working out some of those things to get to some of the conclusions that we've made. I had a lot of uncomfortable conversations with Mark, he was the director, and he the same, wasn't like he was doing anything, but we were just working out the why behind a lot of things. And so, but that took a lot of trust to do that, because I have to come in planning to be honest, which means not that I'm right, but I'm willing to like be honest and be right or wrong. Just I want the best solution to the problem that I think I see. I don't know what the answer is, but like I have to be willing and honest to see, like show what I see. I owe it to our team, or I owe it to our ministry. I owe it to him to like be honest about my vantage point or the things that I feel, or yeah.
Kind of going back to the accountability part.
Yeah.
Specifically for you, Kendra.
Yeah.
I guess like a two-part question statement. How do you, because you're a pretty higher up position in your church.
Yes.
Our church is much smaller than yours, but in a similar capacity, I have a lot of leadership roles in the church, and so a lot of the women that are my age that I could look to potentially for accountability, I'm either their small group leader or their worship minister or something, and so it's really hard. And my family is very steeped in our church, and so Chris is laughing because he knows. And so I think the accountability of being able to be honest and open, not for gossip, but just saying what I'm going through or processing something, and being fully authentic and repentant, of saying like, I'm having this issue in my marriage or whatever. People either see my husband who is the worship minister or so-and-so, my family member who's here. And so it's kind of hard to look at women who are my age that I'm not leading, or might look at my family in a certain way. So do you have accountability in your church, even as a higher up? Like,
that's a very, very like practical and real challenge, being a woman in ministry, because for everyone in leadership, leadership is lonely at the top. So like the more leadership you take on, the more you realize you've just sacrificed a lot, and it's no longer appropriate for you to do things that you used to do, or to authenticity in a sideways group works differently than authenticity when you're you've lost a lot of rights to spew like, Saul did this and I'm angry and I'm like present tense mad about this, not like this happened and this is how he like, but just like an honest and authentic like is different. And so I think it's really important to find a person that you actually do have permission to be the most honest version of yourself. And if not, if that doesn't exist, this sounds weird. I don't know if this is right or not, but I don't think for your sake, you should set yourself up to be in a position like that. I don't think for your sake, you should take on more responsibility or more leadership than you're able to like steward and live inside of. And so for me, that's a elder's wife. I'm like super close with Saul's wife, Lizzie, but there's one of our elders' wives, I'm inside of their connection group, and she's the person that like mentally, even though we're inside of a different stage of life, she's the person that I've decided and communicated and like chosen to like tell things that she literally never asks. Like, we don't have a weekly meeting. We don't like, there's no structure. But there's a lot of things that I text her, that I tell her, that I like in seasons, like go out of my way to get extra time with her when I need it, because I know that. And that's like super important to me. But on our staff team, I don't have a peer that I'm like equal to. And so it's, that means for my health and maturity and godliness, like I find it somewhere else.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, you have a counselor too that you meet with.
Yes,
That's a helpful. So an elder's wife, and I don't want to overshare for you, but yeah, you meet with a counselor every other week. That's also a life-giving place to be like. That's like a true barf scenario. You're just like, you can say it, everything. It's not even connected to the church. Just let it all out. Yeah. So that's a helpful place.
Yes, I just started seeing a counselor this past summer, and I've recommended counseling for years, of course, but never have jumped the hurdle of like, well, I don't have anything that bad, or like other people, like I don't want to take the spot of someone who has like a crisis, because it's just like normal stuff that I'm working through. And finally was like, I actually think I deserve help too. And so, yeah, it's been like so good. And obviously inside of a hard year, it's been like really grounding for me. So, but that's a great question.
How do you help someone who is like way over in the feminist bracket? Who does believe that like women are better than men? Like, do you have any verses, or like how do you help them like?
Yeah, that's a gospel issue. Genesis chapter 1 would be a good place to start. God creates all things, image of God, men and women created equal. Yes, I think it would be hard to reconcile a lot of the teaching, most of the teachings of the Bible with the worst parts of feminism. Let me just say real quick, I think feminist philosophy has done a lot of good in the church too. Yeah. Like called foul on a lot of stuff like that shouldn't happen. Like, you're right. Your solutions might be wrong. That was the right identification of a problem though. And so I don't want to just like totally make that look bad. But yeah, I think the answer to that is probably just pretty generic. Like, that's like a Bible reading, kind of gospel sharing sort of issue. I don't think I can just convince somebody that just out of my own reasoning, why men and women are equal. I feel like that's something the Holy Spirit has to do through His Word. But I can read the Bible with people and help them see that, how God has elevated both the value of men and women in the Bible, and how they can be equal in dignity and value, but different in role and function. I mean, that's probably where I'd start with that.
And often there's like deeply personal and emotional reasons for and hurt behind people's like strongest convictions, and both like both sides of that, like there's often like legit reasons and bad examples of leadership. And so, you know, when you've been sexually abused and authority was redefined in your foundational years, there's legit, like you're convinced of something that you actually believe because you don't know anything other than abuse of power. And that's not a logical thing that you can teach. But when you walk with people or help redeem what was broken, in modeling like a healthy use of power that lifts people up and doesn't tear them down or doesn't rob from people, but it adds to people, like that true leadership actually isn't something to fight, like women to fight against men for, but
Yeah, just making them talk it out is helpful. I mean, like, maybe it's like an abuse scenario. Even father wounds are basically everywhere, and people respond to that in different ways. You know, like it can lead someone to have either one of these views. You know, you're like, my father did this or didn't do this, and so I dislike men, and here's why. You know. Or it can go the other way, like I never had the right kind of like authority in my life, and so now you like too freely give it away to men in your life. And so it can go either way, and so that's why I think it's great just to draw out people's stories and let them explain it. Often as they start to explain it, it can become clearer for them. Yeah.
For you guys, I know a lot of this is like in the interpersonal staff relationship or on an individual disciple making type paradigm. Can you speak to, you know, if your church has been wrestling with this for 10 years on like 50,000 foot level on helping our church kind of shift? What were some of the couple of things maybe that were helpful for the church at large that this really helped to move our church from still complementarian, but some people think if you let a woman pray on Sunday morning, like all of a sudden we're egalitarian, or you know, it's like, no, we're not.
Yeah.
You know, like we still hold, you know, an equality of essence but a distinction of role type paradigm here, but that's a whole lot more freeing for women than what traditionally has been seen. So from a church perspective, maybe what were some of the challenges or some things that principles that help navigate the church through that, if things came up? Maybe your church was planted that way from the start and it wasn't an issue. But,
We've actually kind of gone back and forth as a church.
Okay.
So I think, you know, early on we were probably even, just because of the guy who started it, the way he thought about it, he was just more like, whatever, just get someone in front who can do a good job. And oftentimes that was, often that was a woman. So he's like, all right, go. And then we hired in some people who were, you know, I don't know how to say this diplomatically, but just, you know, theologically more conservative. Like, let's pull that back a little bit. But I think that in our church, I think more recently, we've been thoughtful and slow. So that's a key. Thoughtful and slow. Like I think it has to be taught and then like applied slowly. Even if like in your conviction, in your guts, it's like we need more like visibility of women in our worship services or in our discipling processes or in our staff team. If you just slam that in, it's really similar to like hiring the wrong person to like have some like mega job. It's like you just did good heart, terrible decision to, you know, elevate that person who's not ready for that. I think a similar thing can happen in that. So I would say, you know, you do it thoughtfully, slowly. The churches need to figure out where do we land here? Like get really into the weeds of like what are our positions on these different things. And then to move slow, to teach your church, you know, from elders down to members, and then more broadly, so people know when it begins to happen, they know why it's happening and what we believe about this sort of thing. I think at Salt Company and specifically, so Salt Company is the ministry we're part of. It's a college ministry. We don't have women preach at Salt Company. Just put that out there. We don't. But we do have women lead worship and do what we call hosting, which is like call to worship at the start, announcements, and then even close down the service with like kind of a final application, call to action, reflection on the sermon. And so those are some small things we've done. Like I'm getting really 50,000 all the way to like 0. Some practical things that we've done to like kind of slowly introduce more like the visibility of women, so that the women in our and men in our college ministry can see leading women.
Yeah. And also outside of preaching, teaching opportunities, like when there's other teaching or equipping like contexts, we've tried hard to like not just find a woman who can do it, but like develop women to be able to do those things. And so we have a class that we teach on campus called Gospel 101 for all like students to take. And it's like really important to us that like all of our staff teaches that, and all of our girls in particular are like teaching that class to our students. And so that's a place where there's no reasons based on our convictions like that a girl couldn't teach that kind of class. And so just because it's theology and it's not something topically different, like they can teach that, and it's really good for them actually too. And so
yeah, and this, I mean, even this dynamic right here, this is, so we have our student leadership team is about 300 people. This is how we teach them.
yeah.
Just like that. We kind of go back and forth, and like to them, to the average person, it's like they know I'm the director, but they don't, to them, we're like almost like, I mean, equal in terms of like our leadership of Salt Company. And so I think there's a lot of space. Basically any space we can, we have kind of introduced, you know, women leaders. So students see that. Yeah.
So I come from like a pretty conservative like background, church and everything. And I get a lot of female college students who are looking towards me as like, okay, X, Y, and Z has been harmful and been said to me as me entering women in ministry. And then I equally have men coming to me going, how do I become that ally, because they've never been taught. So what are some of the, and maybe this is a bad question, but what are some of the ways that you kind of have the introductory conversation with people when women are starting to become, like wanting to be in ministry, and then how do you help the men who are like, I want to be an ally for women in ministry, and they're looking to you like how I was like, do what you're doing, but involve and incorporate, so maybe there's a little bit more of a detailed answer. I don't know.
Yeah. I'll just say the first two things that come to my mind. For one is, I think the average, so I'll speak to the guy who's like, what do I do? Like, you'll probably have to look a little bit harder to find the right kind of person. Again, because a guy is going to naturally have more like relationships with guys. So when he's looking for the next staff member, he's got 5 guys he can think of off the top of his head who have come through the ministry or whatever, and he's not as connected to the women. It's like, you might have to do 5 times the effort to like get the right names on the list and get the right interviews. So I think it'll take a little extra work, totally worth it, but it will take work. We have to be honest about that. A really helpful book that we've both read is called Developing Female Leaders. I would recommend that to, and it's written both, I think, for men and women in church leadership. And we're going to buy it for all of our college pastors in our network, just because it's been helpful to us over the last year. So that's like a super practical thing. Developing Female Leaders.
It's by Katie Cole, Kadicole.
She's someone who, she's, I would say, gifted more like Kendra, where it's like she's not like a purebred like kids ministry or like women's ministry. She's like, I think she's functionally executive pastor at a church in like Wisconsin or something. So
well, there you go.
Yeah.
There you go. Deal of the day.
yeah, it's really helpful. And she actually goes through some of this. I don't know if she uses these same words.
She tries hard. She doesn't. It's frustrating. She doesn't tell you what she actually believes, so she tries hard to be like really fair, and like I think the tagline is like navigating the minefields of women in ministry or something, like just trying to like paint a picture of like where are the challenges and the pit ditches and the like so it's not everything in it is like gold, like any book or resource or whatever, but it's really thought provoking and question like, wait, why this or why that, or I feel that. Why do I feel that? Like, what should I do about it? I feel like we didn't really answer your question. So, I feel like you have a role to play and he has a role to play with like pulling people up and like,
We're going to do a breakout. The next one's on like a healthy staff culture, staff teams. And one of our 7 marks of a healthy staff team is clarity. So if I was talking to a female who's gonna jump on staff, I would be like, you should get so clear. Like you should demand a super clear job description. And I would tell the hiring person, whether that's male or female, like just the clarity of the role and what to expect, I think is a huge part of being someone who like succeeds and flourishes in ministry. Clarity on both ends is really helpful for navigating some of the minefields of being a woman in ministry, and specifically a woman in ministry in a denomination that is more complementarian. I think it's totally worth it to get that clarity at the front. Yeah. A couple more questions. Yeah. Okay.
Specifically for Kendra, would you teach your 300 students your like leadership thing, just you, or are you always with Saul?
I could.
Yeah.
Okay, then
Yes.
follow up.
Yeah, we've had like
Yes.
our first leader meeting of the year. It was just
Oh, yeah.
Kendra
It
and
was
Hannah
2
Beth,
girls.
and I was just like out.
So then, if that, I think just theological question, that's the 300 leader is good, but then Kendra wouldn't teach in your larger college gathering. How do you line that up?
Yep.
No pressure, Saul.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you the position of our elders. The position of our elder team is that 1 Timothy 2:12 is talking about a gathered church, that when we're a gathered church, it should be men/elders who are doing the teaching. And so we say that our Salt Company gathering, it meets in the same place, the same worship leaders. It looks, we would call it analogous to our Sunday morning gathering. We don't do baptism there, we don't do communion, so you can make an argument, well, is it really the church though? If it's not multi-generational, like, yeah, you could make that case. The position of our elders over the last decade or so has been like, man, the nature of our Salt Company gathering is analogous to our Sunday morning gathering, and we've chosen to apply 1 Timothy 2:12 to our Sunday morning gathering as like, I think that's a restriction on men preaching. So that's why we do it. I know that's not like a totally nicely packaged thing, but that's at least what you would hear from our elder team. Yeah.
Yeah, so the kind of teaching and equipping and development that happens in our leader meetings is much different than the preaching that happens on the stage in Salt Company. So,
Yeah. I just real quick, I just want to highlight for each of us in the room, like the way you guys, I actually just emailed Mark this, like the way you guys honor your church and one another is perhaps the best lesson to be taught in this room. That if we want to know what it looks like to bless and honor the shared experience of genders within the church, your demonstration of how you speak about to one another teaches far more than you might potentially be trying to do. I just want to say thank you. Keep it up. Send videos of this to your friends. So helpful.
that's funny because one of the answers to, I think your question I was going to say, it first came to mind is like, what you actually believe drips and way more than you know. And so what your church believes about the value and the prominence of women flourishing, it drips everywhere. And so I think like one of the things that I value is like, or that I feel is I know that our church has all sorts of issues and problems and like inconsistencies, but at our core, like we really value men and women and staff and non-staff, like flourishing and thriving, and we're on a journey working out all of the problems, and they won't end, like, because our culture is shifting and our personnel is shifting and our leadership is shifting. Like, we are a moving organism. We're not a static place that has rules and lists and and so being inside of a church, I didn't know, this wasn't like intentional on my end coming in. I just happened to land at the right time in the right place. But like moving forward is like a non-negotiable for me, is like putting myself inside of a place as a woman in ministry that I know people actually like believe in me and are want me to flourish, not just like what I could do or what I could show or who I could be, like to prove that we value women or prove that whatever, but that I am actually like valued and being set up to succeed. And so,
yeah, unfortunately, a lot of churches, like their methodology doesn't actually reflect their theology. And so, and I'm not saying ours does it perfectly either, but that's our goal, at least, that our theology is really tight with our methodology. Yeah, like sometimes, you can be complementarian in your theology, like that's on your faith official doctrinal statement with Bible verses in parentheses, but then like it feels like this, So don't do that. The other thing, there's this photo that we've shared with each other. We've actually shared with our staff team. This is just a helpful image, maybe for the guys especially. Just share this. Because of the nature of what the power that men have had in our world, in our nation, inside of the church, in our denomination over the last how many centuries, I do think there is a special obligation of men to compensate, to work the other way. And so there's this picture of this little boy. The girl can't reach the drinking fountain, so there's this little boy down on the ground, crouching down, and there's this girl getting up to reach the water fountain. And so I hope all the guys in the room feel that, like, you need to do that. Like, let a female in your team, in your staff team, like, you're going to have to, like, crouch down and, like, not get the drink of water because you're elevating someone else to do that. So that's been a helpful image for us to think through. I mean, it kind of started as funny, but it's like, actually, that's a really great image for us all to just remember. And I think that's what it'll take to be truly complementarian, because there's maybe been some of this in the past. Like, yeah, there's going to take some compensation there, and you need to kneel down and elevate the women in your ministry.
Which takes a lot of work. I know we said this before, but like Saul, it is way more inconvenient to do that than it is convenient, because, for example, like this is just like a small example, but one of like our summer challenge, like things that we do in the summer is like help our staff learn how to preach. So it is like a preaching lab, and the obvious thing is like, well, the guys are in the preaching lab because one day they will be preachers and they need to learn to teach or whatever. But like, it would be so much more easy to just teach a man how to be a preacher than to like feel a stewardship of teaching a gendered staff like how to communicate and instruct and equip. Like, it takes a lot more work to provide holistic development that is not so narrow into like just. Of course, our preachers need to learn how to preach, but like he's done a lot of work to like open our understandings and build out our like hosting elements, because our college students need our female staff girls to be represented in like on the stage, like helping to lead our ministry. Like, they need examples if they are going to have any hope of becoming a woman who flourishes inside of God's design. And the stage is like an obvious place for that to happen. And so, yeah, the guys in our context have done a lot of work and like have to go out of their way a lot of times to like build out and rethink and reimagine to create space for not just like really clean like teaching and development opportunities. So
Yeah, and that, just say one more thing about that point. I noticed it because like the people, I was on a Thursday night gathering, there's a lot of people there, and like I would preach, and then like our worship leader would kind of do like the opening and closing. It was like his first year. He has like so little authority here. And Kendra is like tied with me as like kind of the most authoritative person in the room. I don't know, I don't have a better way to say that. So that's just how I said it. And I'm like, I want the students to kind of know who's in charge around here. Like Jesus is the chief shepherd, but he's also entrusted us to lead Salt Company. So I want the students to see that. And so given our theology, there are some restrictions, but there's only some restrictions. And so the hosting element, being someone who does call to action, call to worship, benediction, that's a place to let the students see a woman communicate and shepherd, and for them to see who is making leadership decisions around here. So that's a really practical way that we've tried to try to do this well. One more question? Got like 10 minutes. Yeah, okay. You got the last question.
So we have interesting mixes of women in our church, like every other church. What I often feel like we see is really women who really toe the line of hard feminism, of really more like toxic feminism, who are the more outspoken, more like, I have these thoughts and these things need to happen. Or a lot of women who are like, no, this is okay, like I'm comfortable with where we're at as far as female leadership and female representation. And so it's like we want to be able to elevate women. I know, like I see our staff that want to do that, but we have so many women who are just unwilling to help be the change. How would you maybe encourage women on either side of the fence? It's like, I want to complain, but I don't want to actually have to be on the stage, and I don't want to be your, like, I don't know, dancing monkey for lack of a better term. Some people just don't want to get on the stage and actually like help us have healthy representation of women. Yeah. If that makes sense, what I just said. Yeah.
I think it depends on, maybe like depending on the depth of a relationship with those people, it's like that's probably a character issue to like, not just about women, but it's like to have a complaint that you're not willing to be a part of the solution is unhealthy, and part of being discipled in that scenario is learning what to do with frustration and how to like see future progress, not just identify current problems. And so, every church has a choir of people who are really good at seeing all of the things that are wrong and not right or whatever. We're really careful, or I'm really like trying to learn to be really careful of like who gets the louder voice. And the person that person wouldn't have a loud voice, I would say. But the person who you can just tell there's like a deep humility and a concern and a willingness to like sacrifice in order to like make something better. That person I want to listen to all day, and I want them to join us in participating in helping fix the problem, because I'm not unaware that there's problems, but it takes leadership to fix the problem, and so I can't steward all of that. I need help, So
yeah, who you talk to and who you listen to, I think is just a great life lesson.
And if we haven't learned anything this year inside of COVID, it's like a lot of people have a lot of things to say. And how to lead inside of that is a huge challenge.
Churches aren't corporations. Well, I guess technically, tax-wise they are. But anyway, but they're an organization. Organizations have hierarchies and org charts. I just think sometimes it can be unhelpful to like just go down or even over with complaints. Like there's only so much like even Kendra and I can do just talking about something that's happening above us. It's like, that's going to run into a dead end pretty quick. But what we can do is go up. Like, hey, I see something, and I want to talk about it. Like, what do the elders or the leadership structure, what do they believe about this or that? So I think that's another encouragement I would have to like, if you're going to like go through the effort of having some of these hard conversations, make sure it's with the right people who can actually move the needle or answer the questions on behalf of the church, because just like sideways energy and going down the org chart, can sometimes be and feel futile. So, yeah. Well, we really appreciate you guys taking the time to learn with us today. Hopefully, there's been something practical both for the guys and girls here. Why don't I close us in prayer, and then we'll break. I think for lunch is next, but I didn't check the schedule. Okay. God, thank you for the women in this room who you are raising up to disciple others and develop others. And we ask that you would also bring men and women into their life to disciple and develop them. Give our churches clarity and grace as we navigate through some of these issues over the next decade or two. Help us to be so understanding and to give the benefit of the doubt, but also to ask hard questions and to fight the right kind of battles. So give us courage, give us wisdom, give us humility and grace. And today, as we learn together even more, give us energy to receive what you want us to receive. And now we ask that as we go to lunch that you'd bless it to our bodies. It's in your name that we pray. Amen.